Are you ready to learn the truth about what was hidden behind the heavy velvet curtains of the wealthiest mansions of the late 19th century? What appeared to be a perfect fairy tale of sparkling crystal and expensive silk on the outside often turned out to be an invisible prison for its inhabitants on the inside. It was within these luxurious walls that women lost their voices, dissolving into endless rules of strict etiquette and the expectations of others. Watch the video to the end to learn how incredible wealth became a cause of profound isolation, robbing its owners of their right to their own lives. What if I told you that everything you believed about the carefree life of wealthy ladies is not true? Every morning, the owners of vast fortunes did not begin with a pleasant rest, but with a strict schedule, planned down to the minute. From dawn onwards, her day was controlled by an endless series of costume changes, each corresponding to a strictly defined time of day. Morning visits required one outfit, lunch a completely different one, and evening receptions forced her to change her entire wardrobe. The woman could not simply stay in her room and enjoy the silence, as her presence was required in the reception rooms. Managing the house was a heavy burden on her shoulders, requiring constant supervision of a huge staff of servants. She had to check the menu for the coming days, assess the quality of the purchased products, and ensure that the silverware was perfectly clean. The slightest mistake by a cook or maid reflected on her personal reputation in the eyes of a demanding society. Lunch with the family was no relaxation either, as perfect posture had to be maintained at the table. It was impossible to discuss really important matters. All that remained was to engage in small talk about the weather and upcoming balls. Each piece of food had to be put into the mouth with grace, constantly thinking about how it looked from the outside. The taste of expensive dishes was lost in endless thoughts about the correct position of cutlery. The afternoon hours were often devoted to writing endless letters and replies to invitations. Handwriting had to remain impeccable, and the wording had to comply with the complex rules of social etiquette. One wrong word in a message could lead to a serious scandal and exclusion from important social events. The hand grew tired from the heavy pen, but the process could not be interrupted for a minute. In the evening, preparations for the main event of the day began, requiring many hours of sitting in front of the mirror. Maids pulled the hair into elaborate hairstyles, securing it with heavy hairpins that caused constant tension. Applying powder and blush turned into creating the perfect mask, hiding any signs of fatigue. The woman's face became a motionless porcelain work of art, devoid of living emotions. Before going to bed, a lady felt only complete exhaustion from the past day, filled with other people's rules. She needed to take off all the heavy layers of clothing to finally take a deep breath. But even at night in her bedroom, she had to look flawless in case of unforeseen circumstances. Sleep was only a short pause before this endless cycle began again, with the first rays of the sun. Years passed, turning young, hopeful girls into weary guardians of the hearth. Their lives resembled the perfectly tuned mechanism of an antique clock, where every detail knew its place. Any deviation from the usual rhythm was punished by harsh public condemnation and instant isolation. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this schedule, so please write about it in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. This is what happens behind the closed doors of luxurious palaces. Huge mansions were designed to clearly separate spaces into male and female halves. Libraries, smoking rooms, and billiard rooms with dark oak paneling belonged exclusively to men. Women were strictly forbidden from entering these rooms, which deprived them of access to serious conversations and books. The women's territory was limited to bright living rooms, boudoir, and winter gardens. These rooms were furnished with elegant furniture on thin legs, covered with pale silk, which was uncomfortable to sit on for long periods of time. The entire space was filled with fragile, porcelain figurines and vases that required careful and slow movements. The house was transformed into a museum display case, where the hostess herself was just one of the most expensive exhibits. Privacy in such a house was practically impossible due to the constant presence of maids. The servants followed their mistress closely, ready at any moment to adjust a fallen shawl or hand her a fan. There was no personal space whatsoever. Every action was instantly known to the entire household. The mistress was always under invisible but palpable surveillance, unable to be alone with her thoughts. Special attention was paid to doors, which had to remain slightly ajar during the day. A closed door to a woman's room aroused suspicion and was considered a breach of decorum. Because of this, there were constant drafts in the rooms, and any conversation could be overheard by passers-by. The lack of personal boundaries was oppressive and forced her to constantly control her facial expressions. Even a walk in one's own garden required prior preparation and a change of clothes. Gardens were laid out according to strict geometric rules, with perfectly straight paths and trimmed bushes. There was no place for wild nature or random paths where one could hide from prying eyes. Every step on the crunchy gravel echoed, alerting everyone to the whereabouts of the lady of the house. The architecture of the mansions emphasized the status of the owner, but ignored the needs of its inhabitants. High ceilings made the rooms cold and uncomfortable, and huge fireplaces could not heat the space. In winter, women were forced to wrap themselves in heavy shawls, sitting close to the fire and suffering from drafts. Physical discomfort became a constant companion to life among gilded walls and stucco moldings. The golden cage closed tightly, leaving no chance of escape or change to the established order. The walls of the houses, lined with expensive marble, reliably hid the melancholy and loneliness from society. Over time, women got used to these boundaries, even ceasing to dream of going beyond the limits of their luxurious confinement. Do you think wealth could compensate for such a complete lack of personal space? Watch the video to the end to find out the answer to this question and understand what was hidden behind the multi-layered outfits. What lies behind the beautiful picture of formal portraits is astonishing. Women's fashion at that time was a tool for strict control over the body and movements. Every morning began with the process of tightening thick lacing, which formed a perfect but unnatural silhouette. Breathing became shallow, and any sudden movement was simply physically impossible. The heavy fabrics from which the dresses were sewn added enormous weight, which had to be carried around all day long. Velvet, taffeta, and thick silk gathered into numerous folds, collecting dust from the floors with every step. The multi-layered petticoats got tangled up in their feet, turning a simple climb up the stairs into a real challenge. Maintaining balance in such an outfit required constant tension of all the muscles in the body. Arm movements were also severely restricted by narrow sleeves and tight armholes. A woman could not raise her arms high or make a broad gesture during conversation. All gestures were reduced to smooth, minimal movements of the hands, encased in narrow gloves. Gloves were worn constantly, even indoors, and were only removed during meals. Footwear consisted of narrow shoes with thin heels, completely unsuitable for long walks. The last were made artificially narrow to make the foot appear petite and graceful. Wearing such shoes every day deformed the foot and made every step a painful ordeal. Because of this, ladies moved slowly, taking small steps, which society took as a sign of noble origin. Jewelry, despite its value, also added weight and discomfort. Massive necklaces made of precious stones pressed on the collarbones, and heavy earrings pulled on the earlobes. Diadems and tiaras worn at balls dug into the scalp, causing severe headaches. Beauty required constant silent patience, hidden behind a polite smile. Even at home, away from prying eyes, it was impossible to completely abandon the strict rules of fashion. Home dresses were slightly looser, but still required a certain silhouette. Relaxing your back or sitting in a comfortable position meant showing unacceptable weakness. Perfect appearance became the main responsibility, consuming all physical strength. Please like this video if you are interested in the history of women's fashion. The secret passed down from generation to generation is the true value of social visits. One of the main tasks of the hostess was to maintain a complex web of social connections through daily visits. This was not just friendly conversation, but a strict ritual of exchanging visiting cards according to established rules. A woman had to remember the status of all her acquaintances so as not to offend anyone by visiting them in the wrong order. Every day in the afternoon, the crew would gather at the porch and begin visiting the necessary houses. The visit lasted exactly 15 minutes, during which it was necessary to engage in empty, meaningless conversation. Only safe topics were discussed: the weather, the latest music premieres, or flower shows. Talking about politics, economics, or expressing strong emotions was considered the height of impropriety. Refusing or skipping these visits could result in social disaster for the entire family. If the card was not left on time, it was perceived as a direct insult and a reason to sever relations. A husband's reputation depended directly on how diligently his wife observed these social protocols. Women became diplomats whose main weapons were impeccable politeness and a card with a folded corner. Returning home, the hostess had to receive return visits in her own living room. She would sit for hours waiting for guests, ready at any moment to feign sincere joy at their arrival. Tea was poured into delicate porcelain cups with elaborate ceremonies that required maximum concentration. The silence in the house was broken only by the clinking of spoons and the rustling of the visitors' silk dresses. Behind this facade of politeness lay constant competition and evaluation of other people's outfits and interiors. Every detail in the living room was subjected to mental analysis by the guests. The hostess had to demonstrate wealth, but do so discreetly so as not to appear vulgar. The constant tension of having to meet other people's standards was more exhausting than any physical work. Day after day, year after year, this endless cycle of visits and cards was repeated. Women spent their energy maintaining relationships that brought them no emotional support. They were surrounded by hundreds of acquaintances, but remained completely alone in their experiences. Can you imagine how difficult it was to live in a world without real friends? Watch the video to the end to find out how these rules deprive women of the most important thing. Despite the luxury that surrounded them, women of the Gilded Age rarely had direct access to real money. All of the family's wealth, including the bride's dowry, passed entirely to the husband after the wedding. The man alone made decisions about real estate purchases, investments, and major expenses. The wife remained only a beautiful facade of this wealth, with no say in financial matters. To cover her daily needs, the woman was allocated a certain allowance, the size of which depended on her husband's mood. From these funds, she had to pay for clothes, dressmakers, charitable contributions, and gifts. At the same time, she was expected to always look appropriate to the status of her incredibly wealthy husband. The constant need to ask for money was humiliating and emphasized her complete financial dependence. Bills for large purchases from fabric stores or jewelry shops were sent directly to her husband's office. He reviewed every line, assessing the appropriateness of his wife's spending. If the expenses seemed excessive to him, he could make a scene or publicly cancel the order, humiliating his wife in front of the merchants. This created an atmosphere of constant fear of making a mistake when choosing the next hat. Charity was one of the few areas where women could at least somewhat control their finances. They organized lavish bazaars and collected donations for the poor, feeling important. However, even these funds were strictly controlled by committees consisting exclusively of men. Women were only trusted with fundraising, but not with strategic management. Widows sometimes got the right to manage their wealth, but even then, they faced a lot of restrictions. Their husbands' relatives often challenged wills, trying to take control of the remaining assets. Society viewed financially independent women with suspicion, considering them incapable of rational thinking. They were constantly pressured to remarry in order to return the money to male control. The lack of financial freedom made it impossible to protest against domestic rules. Without money, it was impossible to rent accommodation, hire a carriage, or simply go to the seaside to recharge your batteries. The mansion became a prison with luxurious food, where every piece of bread had to be paid for with obedience. The financial noose around their necks was invisible, but it held tighter than any steel chains. What would happen if no one knew about this hidden aspect of women's education at the time? It was believed that excessive reading and deep reflection spoiled a woman's character and made her unsuitable for family life. The education of girls from high society was limited to a superficial study of languages, dancing, and piano playing. Serious sciences such as philosophy or exact mathematical disciplines were considered dangerous for their fragile minds. The libraries in the mansions were full of books, but access to them was strictly controlled by the head of the family. Women were only allowed to read light novels, moralistic treatises, or romantic poetry. Reading newspapers was discouraged in order to protect the ladies from disturbing news about the real world. Intellectual hunger had to be satisfied with empty plots that did not provide food for thought. If a woman showed a talent for writing or painting, it was perceived as nothing more than a charming domestic hobby. Publishing one's work under one's own name was unthinkable and equated with public disgrace. Many talented authors of that time were forced to hide behind male pseudonyms in order for their work to be taken seriously. Creativity within the home had to remain inconspicuous and not distract from the direct duties of a housewife. Keeping diaries remained the only safe way to express one's true thoughts and feelings. These velvet-covered notebooks concealed deep reflections, secret tears, and unspoken grievances. But even diaries had to be hidden under the mattress for fear that the husband would find and read them. Writing became an act of quiet resistance in a world of absolute control. The constant suppression of intellectual needs led to deep apathy and a loss of interest in life. The days merged into a monotonous series of empty conversations and monotonous embroidery. The mind, deprived of nourishment, gradually faded away, leaving behind only perfect manners. Women turned into beautiful but empty vessels filled with other people's rules. The thirst for knowledge had to be satisfied by secretly reading forbidden books by candlelight. It was a huge risk that added anxiety to an already stressful life. But the thirst for understanding the world was stronger than the fear of being caught doing it. How destructive do you think this suppression of personality was for intelligent women? Watch the video to the end to understand the consequences of this constant silence. The main challenge for the hostess of the mansion was the dinner parties, which were organized on an incredible scale. At these events, she did not act as an individual, but as the main jewel in her husband's collection. Her task was to sit at the head of a long table, radiating calm and impeccable elegance. She had to make sure that the guest glasses were always full and that the plates were changed silently. During the long feast, the woman was not allowed to actively participate in the conversations of the male guests. If business deals or politics were being discussed, she was only supposed to nod politely, showing that she was listening attentively. Her voice was heard only when it was necessary to pay a compliment or offer the next course. Silence was the golden rule that ensured the smooth running of a social gathering. Heavy tiaras and tightly laced corsets made sitting at the table physically exhausting. It was impossible to lean back in your chair or change your posture. You had to keep your back absolutely straight. A smile had to remain on your face at all times, even if the conversation was frankly boring. Perfect posture and a frozen expression created the illusion of serenity. Fatigue from such receptions accumulated, but complaining about it was strictly forbidden. The success of the event was measured by how smoothly and unobtrusively everything went thanks to her efforts. If the guests were comfortable, her husband received praise, and his wife remained in the shadow of his triumph. Her work in organizing the celebration was taken for granted, requiring no special thanks. When the last guest left the mansion, the woman was left alone with the frightening emptiness of the huge halls. Having taken off her heavy jewelry, she felt only complete emptiness after many hours of performance. She needed to regain her strength as the next day this endless marathon continued. Life had turned into a series of performances where she had no right to take off her mask. She was a perfect mechanism, providing comfort to others at the expense of her own resources. Her beauty and manners were converted into social capital for her family, without bringing her any satisfaction. The reflection in the mirrors of the ballrooms showed a perfect picture, behind which lay a deep longing. In this glittering crowd, she was the loneliest person in the world. Any display of strong emotions, whether anger, tears, or simply fatigue from monotony, was harshly suppressed. Society at that time believed that women's nervous systems were too fragile for real life. If the mistress of the house dared to express dissatisfaction with her situation, it was instantly declared a sign of nervous exhaustion. Husbands quickly found a way to pacify their discontented wives by using methods of forced rest. The main way to restore a woman's obedience was strict isolation within her bedroom. The room was darkened by drawing heavy curtains to deprive her of sunlight. She was forbidden to get out of bed, read books, write letters, or receive visitors. This method was called treatment by rest, but in reality it was a sophisticated form of house arrest. The woman lay in semi-darkness all day long, unable to occupy her mind with anything. Food was brought to her in bed, relieving her of even the need to move to the table. The absence of external stimuli did not calm her down, but rather led to a state of deep despair. The silence of the huge house weighed heavily on her ears, forcing her to listen to every rustle behind the door. Instead of solving real problems in the family, this method simply removed the inconvenient person from view. The husband continued to lead an active social life, while his wife withered away in the silence of her closed chambers. Society sympathized with him, believing that he bore the heavy cross of caring for an unstable spouse. No one was interested in the real reason for her condition. Only the outward facade of well-being mattered. Many women who went through such a period of isolation lost what remained of their vibrant personalities. They became quiet, submissive, and completely indifferent to what was happening around them. Their movements became slow, and their voices quiet so as not to attract unnecessary attention. The mansion was finally transformed into a place where their spirit was broken for the sake of maintaining respectability. This invisible oppression slowly but surely destroyed their lives, leaving no visible traces. In formal portraits, they continued to smile, dressed in the finest silks and lace. But the eyes in these paintings often betrayed the abyss of loneliness into which they were plunged. The luxury of the interiors contrasted with the absolute emptiness that reigned in their souls. Even when faced with unbearable conditions, a woman had no practical way of leaving her home. Divorce in the age of glamour was associated with incredible social and legal difficulties. The law almost always sided with the man, leaving the initiator of the divorce without any means of support. Divorce was a stigma that permanently removed a woman from the lists of decent society. Being left without her husband's financial support meant falling into absolute poverty, as there were no professions for noble ladies. They did not know how to earn money and had no right to the inheritance that remained in the hands of their former spouse. Life in cheap boarding houses on the outskirts of the city was a frightening prospect after years of luxury. Fear of the unknown and poverty forced them to endure the most humiliating marriages. That is why most women chose the path of silent suffering within their golden cages. They created a parallel life within the mansion, trying to avoid their unloved husbands as much as possible. The house was divided into invisible zones of influence, where spouses existed as strangers under the same roof. The outward glamour of marriage was maintained solely for the sake of preserving social appearances. They hid their tearful eyes behind veils as they went to another Sunday service at church. There they listened to sermons about obedience and family duty, knowing that there was no help to be found. The entire system was designed to keep them subjugated, leaving them no escape route. The walls of their homes seemed like impregnable fortresses from which it was impossible to escape. The respectability of the family was valued above the personal happiness of any of its members. The mansions continued to shine with thousands of lights, welcoming guests and demonstrating the impeccable taste of their owners. No one asked unnecessary questions about why the lady of the house was so pale and silent. Silence was the main condition for survival in this world of strict rules and cold hearts. They were prisoners of their era, locked in corsets of convention and heavy velvet curtains. Their jewels were like shiny shackles that tied them to their place. Day after day, they performed their duties, waiting for time to take them away from this luxurious captivity. Their stories remained untold, hidden behind the thick walls of their respectable homes. Years spent under constant control and oppression inevitably led to the erosion of personality. Women gradually forgot what they wanted in their youth, what dreams they had before marriage. Their own desires were replaced by their husband's demands, visiting schedules, and rules of etiquette. They began to see the world not through their own eyes, but through the prism of social expectations. The voice that used to laugh loudly turned into a quiet whisper, agreeing with everything. They stopped defending their opinions even on the most insignificant matters, choosing the path of least resistance. Their initiative faded away as any independent action was met with a wall of incomprehension and prohibitions. Life passed in a state of constant anticipation of others' instructions and orders. The mirrors in the reception rooms reflected perfect figures dressed in expensive fabrics, but these figures seemed empty. The sparkle disappeared from their eyes, giving way to a flat, expressionless calm. They moved silently around the house, trying to take up as little space as possible. Their presence became almost invisible, as if they were dissolving into the luxurious interiors. The tragedy of these women was that their suffering was completely invisible to the outside world. They were considered lucky, having drawn the winning ticket in the lottery of fate. No one could understand what could make you cry while sitting on a French silk sofa. This inability to share their pain made their isolation even more unbearable and profound. Memories of their former, freer lives gradually faded, leaving only dim fragments. They grew accustomed to the silence, the cold rooms, and the loneliness amid the crowd of guests. Their lives were like a candle slowly burning out in a huge dark hall. The wax melted, the light grew weaker and weaker until it disappeared completely, leaving not even warmth behind. This story is not about wealth, but about the incredible price that had to be paid for it. It is a story of how a glittering facade can hide the deepest human tragedy. These women slowly disappeared inside their respectable homes, leaving behind only perfect portraits. Their voices were never heard in their own era. We see that behind the facade of unimaginable luxury of the glamorous era lay the fates of women deprived of basic human freedoms. Their lives were strictly regulated, subordinated to the interests of others, and locked in the golden cages of huge mansions. This is a difficult lesson that material well-being can never replace sincerity, freedom of choice, and the right to one's own voice. What topics related to hidden history do you think are worth exploring next time? Be sure to share your ideas in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.